Hello, Olympia. Welcome to our twice weekly show with Interfaith Works, Lean in Olympia. We are super excited today to have three amazing guests, two in person, socially distanced, one joining us from the computer. Today we are going to be talking about the upcoming election and different folks who are running for positions that could have a huge impact on us locally. For those of you that are new to watching, Lean in Olympia is a show hosted by Interfaith Works that explores issues at the intersection of humanity, justice, and belief. And we cover all kinds of topics. If you've missed previous episodes, please join us at interfaith-works.org. We've got a Lean in Olympia page there. You can also find us on YouTube for Interfaith Works Thurston County channel. So let's meet our guests. I'm very excited today. If everybody could just go around and introduce yourself and the position that you're running for. Jess, you want to start?
Sure. Hi, my name is Jessica Bateman, and I am running for the State House of Representatives for Legislative District 22, which is being vacated by our very own Representative Beth Dolio.
Beth?
And I'm Beth Dolio, Representative Beth Dolio, and I am running for the seat that Denny Heck currently holds in the 10th Congressional District. I'm running to be your next member of Congress representing the 10th Congressional District. And thank you for having us.
Yes. Carolina, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Carolina Mejia, and I'm running for Thurston County Commission in District 1.
Awesome. And I think I forgot to say who I am. For everybody that doesn't know, I'm Meg Martin, Executive Director of Interfaith Works. Thank you all so much for making the time. I know that this must be kind of the last sprint to the finish line for the election next week. I don't know about you, but I am having a lot of feelings about what next week is going to be like, what it's going to look like, and I imagine that that's really heightened for folks who are in the positions that you are in. So I want to start by just kind of asking you, in general, for folks who might not be as involved with politics on a sort of daily basis, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding sometimes of sort of what each role and what each level at the local, county level, state and federal level, like what each of those positions and what the impact on the everyday lives of Thurston County residents do each of those positions have. So I'm wondering if you could each talk about that a little bit. Like, why should people care about voting for each position, and how does the office you're running for impact people directly, in your opinions? You want to start, Jess?
Sure. Well, for people that don't know about the legislature in Washington, there are 49 legislative districts in the state, and each represents about 150,000 people. Each district has 2 state representatives and 1 senator. So we are fortunate because our own legislative district is in the city's capital, so you can come up in a non-COVID year, to the capital and visit with your legislators. We have a high turnout during the legislative session for people coming and testifying before the legislature, very engaged with our town halls. And the legislature passes important legislation. They pass an operating budget. They also pass a capital budget and transportation budget. So transportation projects that are really integral to our transportation system, getting people to and fro, also planning for a multimodal transportation future for things where we want to have more access to buses and alternative transportation, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, capital budget. So we just last year or the year before, Representative Beth Dolio was able to get us some funding for our very first home fund project, which I know you're aware of, which is our 2828 Martin Way. So we were able to pass a progressive tax measure in Olympia, for housing, and then she was able to leverage funds in the capital budget. So we'll have projects in each district that get help and funding from the legislature. I believe also our downtown arts, the theater was able to get capital funding from our previous legislator, Representative Chris Rakedahl, and also passing legislation bills at a really high level, kind of setting the floor for things like public safety, I know that's an issue we're going to talk about, but making sure as we evolve and change as a society, we bring those forward to the state legislature. They can impact them at the state level, which is very different from the local level where we rely on cities to pass things locally. But if we make the mandate at the state level, cities then have to comply with it.
Got it. Okay. Carolina, would you mind speaking about it from the county level?
Yeah, so the county level, it's really interesting how it all works. Right now we're playing a huge role because of the pandemic. Two of the commissioners actually serve on the Board of Health. And so that's definitely very important, especially right now, and it's something that affects people and their everyday lives. Other roles, they also serve on the Intercity Transit Board and on several other boards and commissions that really have an impact on how the decisions that are made locally. They also decide what the budget is going to be for the county, and that's really important because they decide which departments are going to get more funding, which ones are not going to get as much funding, and which programs are going to be in the county that are going to be serving the general population.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think when I first kind of got more involved in civics in our area, it was really surprising to me just like how much happened at the county and the city level, and so I think that there's sort of sometimes disillusionment once you get to the federal level, not to like set you up right now, but I just like I think that there is so much like daily action, but I've really always seen you, Beth, as somebody that has taken a lot of tangible steps at the state level to impact people's daily lives, and I'm wondering, just to talk about that from your position in Congress and what you see as possible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Congress is very different. It, deals with foreign policy issues. Immigration policy is just, is decided at the federal level. How our healthcare is actually delivered to people is also very much impacted by that. I mean, the states have some roles in that, and a role in that, as does the county, but really the overall policy and how we move forward with healthcare is decided at the federal level. And I ran up against that at the state legislature. We passed a bill that creates a public option, but really without the federal government being a partner and moving some enabling legislation, it's going to be very challenging for us to actually implement that. Immigration. We have at the state level taken a number and tried to pass a number of bills to protect people who, from ICE raids, in the workplace, in schools. But ultimately, the federal government needs to pass an entire immigration reform bill to really right the wrongs that have been done for decades now in terms of our immigration policy. And there are other things where we interact a great deal. The transportation budget, you both mentioned transportation, and the federal government does do a tremendous amount in terms of matching dollars for massive transportation projects. And, I would really love to see our transportation dollars be looked at through a racial justice lens, really looking at making sure that our marginalized communities across this country are considered when we're making decisions about how we use our transportation dollars. And then finally, housing. That is an issue that we've worked on a lot together, and the federal government is not a very good partner. When we look at the Housing Trust Fund, we did a record $175 million into the Housing Trust Fund last year. And the federal government's Housing Trust Fund has $245 million in it for 50 states.
Yeah.
We could be doing so much better and being much better partner in terms of building permanently affordable housing units in our communities. The federal government can play a much bigger role. And there's a lot of reforms that need to be done as well. Our voucher system is kind of a one-size-fits-all, and it doesn't really work for communities where housing prices are higher than other parts of the country. So, for example, our veterans, 500 of them are homeless, and there's 300 vouchers that are going unused because they don't work given the cost of housing, which is also a very significant issue, as you know, that is leading to more and more people finding themselves without homes.
Well, and what we see all the time is that when vacancy rates are really low, people who do have a voucher are up against sometimes 10, 15, 20 other people for the same unit. And so it, like, they don't even need to be discriminated against because of the type of income they have, because there's no even getting to the sort of front of the line for that. And so that availability of units becomes so important to make the voucher system work.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that kind of, we have some specific questions that viewers were interested about, so let's just keep on rolling with the housing. I would love to hear sort of more about the county and state level and what can happen with homelessness and housing. But particularly we hear often the strong call for like crackdowns on homelessness and what's perceived to be public drug use and other survival behavior that's often can be very visible out on the streets. And it's not often understood or accepted typically by the general public. And we hear that this like implies an increased effort in law enforcement and incarceration for these behaviors. And so I'm wondering about what your thoughts are on the call for more law enforcement intervention on issues like homelessness and associated behaviors, and that push and pull that we often hear between, you know, the idea of personal responsibility versus social responsibility. I know there's a lot there.
A lot there to unpack.
Yeah.
Do you want to start?
Sure. You know, I think the conversation about personal responsibility is misguided. Having worked at the local level, you know, what I've seen, I also work during the day in the healthcare field and behavioral health and for community health centers that are an integral component to our social safety net because they provide the majority of care to Medicaid patients across the state. What we really need to do is invest in a robust social safety net and healthcare that is accessible for everyone and includes comprehensive behavioral health supports and services, and also find adequate and available housing for everyone. Because when people are forced to live outside and survive and engage in those survival behaviors like you mentioned, including substance use disorder and other things, we start having a conversation about personal responsibility when the real issue is that they don't have a home, they don't have safe and secure housing, and healthcare is probably very difficult to get when they're surviving on a daily basis outside. We don't have the conversation about personal responsibility for the myriad individuals that have substance use disorder that live in a home because we don't see them. And so I would rather focus on the upstream solution, which is getting people, and we know that can be controversial as a person who worked on the People's House and the very first Home Fund project. That takes enough energy in and of itself, and really targeted strategic relationship building, funding, getting the siting, all of those things. The healthcare system, that takes a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of reforms, like Representative Filio said. So let's focus on those things instead of focusing. I fully and wholeheartedly reject relying on people to interact with the law enforcement system in order to get access to services.
Yeah.
It is the absolute wrong way to think about that. In interacting with law enforcement, becoming involved in our criminal justice system creates harm from the moment that you engage with it. And the longer that you end up being incarcerated, the further that harm goes, which then creates even more challenges and stigmatization and makes housing harder to get. And if you want to go to college and get public education access, etc. So let's focus on getting people housing and healthcare and have a conversation about that.
Carolina, I'm interested, can you speak to the role that the county and the county budget plays when it comes to things like behavioral health care and housing and homelessness?
Yeah, so, houselessness is just such a complex issue, and it will continue to be a complex issue. It's not just a solution, fix all. And just working in our criminal justice system, I'm going to piggyback off what Jessica said. And, we're seeing that our criminal justice system is already overwhelmed just due to COVID, trying to process all of these cases. And if we continue to people for being homeless, then, it's going to continue to get overwhelmed. And that's our whole criminal justice system. I think it's really important that we working with local jurisdictions, local organizations. There's several local organizations that have boots on the ground that are working with our houseless population to just work with them and see what can be done. How can we approach this in a holistic manner and really just show empathy? The county plays, I feel, an important role when it comes to this because, our behavioral health is actually, they're overwhelmed. It's a lot to process, and the budget for it, it's not very big. So I think it's something that we really have to approach and see what can be done. It's really seeing what programs we can put in place to definitely support.
Yeah, Beth, you mentioned when we were talking about this, the 1590. Yeah. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. So for the last 2 years, I have busted my tail on getting a bill passed, 1590, that did just pass this past session, and it basically takes the Olympia's Home Fund, which took 3 or 4 years to actually bring to a vote, and it passed unanimously here. It provides additional dollars to house our chronically homeless neighbors and also provides mental health. The bill did pass this year. It was the #1 priority of the Washington Low-Income Housing Institute. And I'm happy to say that King County has already incorporated it into their budget and taken that vote to actually utilize this tool. And it will provide over $400 million because they're going to bond against it in the King County budget. And the projection is it will house 2,000 chronically homeless neighbors of ours in that community. And actually, Carolina, this is something that the county can do once you are elected and take office in January. You can also pass legislation that enables that small tax to go towards a regional housing plan that would start to, would give the county and the communities, Lacey and Tumwater, some dollars to actually build new housing and permanently affordable housing, as well as provide mental health services. So there's some flexibility in the language of the law that allows for both of those things. The other thing is that King County is being really creative about how they're going about it. So there will be a trailer bill in the legislature this session that sort of gives them a little bit more flexibility in what they can actually purchase, because we've seen there's a lot of real estate on the market right now in terms of being a solution to housing, larger numbers of people, and so there's some things that they need to do to actually make that happen and kind of make their plan and their vision work in King County. So that'll be an interesting topic for you this session.
Can I add?
Yeah, totally.
So I think the important part of that Representative Dolio kind of missed was that so the home fund, we had to put it before the people for a vote. Mm-hmm. The bill that she's talking about allows cities to pass it by a councilmanic vote.
Mm-hmm. And counties.
Because in some communities it's not politically feasible to put it before the people, and yet cities all across Washington state are dealing with a homelessness crisis. So it's a tool that will be very, very beneficial to communities across the state that have leadership that are willing to do that. And I think when we talk about housing and homelessness, I was just at a progressive housing champions conference by Low Income Housing Alliance they organized, and one thing that came up that I think we should really, as future elected officials and people, we need the government to step up to provide housing that is subsidized. Mm-hmm. I am a proponent, and I think you are too, of increasing the supply of housing overall. But if we're going to get to those individuals that are disabled, that can only afford $300 a month, or even people that are working on minimum wage and can't afford, you have to work 2 jobs in Olympia to afford a 1-bedroom apartment now. We have to, as government, provide that housing and make sure that it's subsidized for a perpetuity, hopefully, like the First Home Fund project, which will be affordable at 30% AMI and 50% AMI for the first 15 years, and then 60% AMI, I think, therefore afterwards. But
Which project is that, Jess?
the first home fund project.
Okay, the 2828 Martin.
Yeah.
Great.
The only way that we can get that done, the only time you see that happening is when the public sector steps up. So that means the capital funding in order to build it, partnering with a nonprofit to run it and manage it. You don't see that
The
happening.
vouchers for
Exactly.
the subsidization, yeah.
So we really have to put our minds together, and that's why that bill 1590 will be so important to pass at the county level, because we have so much work to do. We have over 1,000 people that are unhoused in Thurston County. I know the recent point in time count was 850 or something.
Yeah, which we always know is an underrepresentation.
Much lower than actually is. So that's something that I'll push for in the legislature, and tools that cities can use in order to do that, because we know that we're just, we're 225,000 units in Washington State behind right now, just to keep up with current population growth. We're going to have a silver tsunami with people that are aging. They're going to be on fixed incomes. This is a challenge that we have to face.
Well, and I'm happy to hear everybody talk about it in an intersectional way, that like how healthcare is a housing issue and how income is a housing issue, right? Because I think that we, like the federal disability income, the fixed income that so many Americans with permanent disabilities live on, is $744 a month, right? And that hasn't changed in anywhere near close to inflation rates or anything like that for a very long time. And when I look back at the history of kind of how we got here, like a lot of people in our community will be like, how I feel like I woke up last year and I saw tents everywhere, right? And I see that that's the impact that has happened, but it actually took us, 40 years to get to where we are with really deliberate cuts at the federal level. I did just a little exercise on my own where I looked at what the HUD budget was in the late 80s and the cuts that occurred around that time and in the early 90s. And had we even just kept up with basic inflation rates from the time before the big cuts in the Reagan era, we would be, close to 3 times what the actual level of the HUD budget is currently.
It also happened during the Clinton administration when they cut the HUD budget and public housing dollars and instead shifted to building more prisons and incarcerating more people, which costs money, by the way, and has really horrible outcomes. So that's something that...
Yeah, we have a lot to do.
Yeah, totally. I think that, and that, I guess my point really with all of that is just how important it is for more and more people to understand the ways that the local and the state and the federal efforts all weave together and work together. And so having people in positions at each of those levels that really understand some of these complex issues in a like real and a human-centered way feels so vitally crucial.
But the other thing I think that's really important, Meg, is that like your explanation of the vouchers, for example, like you're seeing it, and the people that you serve and work with every day are seeing the impacts of these policies on them, and those voices are left out of the policymaking room. And so making sure that first we elect people who want those people in the policymaking room is really important, but also like just that accountability and making sure that moves forward and figuring out mechanisms to make sure those voices are in our rooms and impacting policy, because we can only make as good policy as we can understand how it is impacting people in the long haul. And I think it's just so important for organizations like yours to be engaged in the policy making and, bringing voices to the table is so important. It's the only way we can really fix what needs fixing, and there's plenty of it.
Yeah, can you expand a little bit on that of like what are the most effective ways of doing that? Like we hear like make calls, send letters, but don't send form letters, send personal letters, but like what are the most effective ways?
Yeah, I think that the most effective way to do that is to build a team of people and then work with the legislator or the member of Congress and say, we want to have a regular meeting time with you, once a month, once every 2 months, where we're checking in, where we're talking about, how these, where we're checking in on policies and how to do that. Because, I think that's part of the problem, right? Our policymakers are kind of removed from what's going on, in people's lives. And really, I think when I hear from people about what's really going on in their lives and how the voucher system isn't working out, that will help me as a policymaker figure out I'm going to do a voucher reform bill, when I get to Congress, because I just feel like that I've heard this over and over again, how the system doesn't work. But I don't have a voucher,
Right.
I'm not a person who is not able to get a home because my voucher isn't working. So I need to hear from that person or from you about how that works. And so I think it is really saying we'd like to have a regular time where we can check in, even if it's with the staff, because the staff will get back to the member about, how to make the policy better. But I think that's important.
Yeah.
You can also invite your legislator or council members or Congress people to tour or to do like a day in the life of and come and visit whatever program you have or facility. I was a legislative assistant years ago and got invited to take a tour of Grub, the nonprofit, and learn about their program. And I went back and told my boss about how amazing it was, and he ended up working on a bill to help with empowering at-risk youth. So it's a good opportunity, especially during interim when the legislative session adjourns, because it helps just that. The legislator can then get to know people, hear the concerns, hear those challenges, and see the work that you're actually doing, and then it provides a connection and an opportunity to share solutions. I think one thing is beneficial coming with a solution. So when you do meet with your legislator, whether that's regularly or not, having some kind of proposed idea of what you see as being beneficial to help you. And if you have a team of people, then you have these different perspectives and different pieces of information that can be inputted, which is really valuable.
Carolina, do you have any tips?
I was just wanted to add to that. I think from my perspective is, how can we make government more accessible to people? In the county level, one of the first things I noticed is the meeting times were at a time where people couldn't really attend them. If you're working, if you're out in the field, 2 o'clock during the weekday, it's not really accessible to people. So the voices that you end up hearing are very limited. And so it's very important that we open the doors up. I think the pandemic has kind of opened the doors up to the possibilities that we have with technology, and really how can we build up on that? How can we improve on that? And really just keep making government more accessible to people. Another thing I've heard is childcare access. Parents who want to be involved, but they can't really because they don't have babysitters, they don't have just family members to take care of their children. So just little things like that. Language accessibility is another one. How can we make local government, all government, more accessible to community members who want to be involved and want to be a part of that process?
And I imagine that that's been particularly hard on the campaign trail, if you will, with COVID-19. Like, I know that you all have run campaigns before. How different has it been? Like, how much harder has it been to connect with voters?
Well, I think traditionally doorbelling is, I think at the congressional level it's probably different, but at the local level and in the legislative race, doorbelling is really important. It's the best way to reach people, to talk face-to-face with people, hear about their concerns, and that obviously has not happened at all. We've adapted. We've done town halls. Initially, we really switched the focus to COVID resources and how to help people when there was a lot of confusion, and kind of pushed pause on the campaign until we figured out what we were going to do. And then we just, did virtually everything virtually. Lots of phone banking, texting. But, you miss seeing people face to face, not just on the campaign, but also just in general. So I think I'll leave it to Beth to talk a little bit more about doing that innovatively, because I've seen her campaign do some really cool things.
Oh, it's been so hard.
Yeah.
It's been a bummer. We've done some town halls. We've reached out to undecided voters. We've done a we've made over 300,000 phone calls at this point, and I don't know, 190,000 texts. So we have focused on really reaching out to people by phone and by text. But then taking some of that information that we have, we've tried to get people together on a Zoom call to just ask questions if they're undecided, to have an opportunity to meet with me. Mixed results. And it has just been one Zoom meeting after another, and really reaching out to people to gather their friends together. And honestly, sometimes I've had some really amazing conversations with like 7 people, and sometimes it's been like, hundreds of people.
Yeah.
But actually that face-to-face. And then I have been at rallies and had some interaction with constituents in that way when they've been masked and socially distanced. Whether that be around police accountability or climate change or RBG's vigil or, so there have been some opportunities in that way.
Did it impact your plans, Carolina, for running?
Yeah, good job. Sorry, again, the volume kind of was technology, right? Was cutting off and on. Could you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah. Just wondering how COVID-19 has impacted your plans for the race.
Well, it's nothing. I think campaigning just in a whole has been nothing like I expected at all as a first-time candidate. And COVID definitely threw a wrench into everything we had planned. I think every time we set a date on the calendars, something happened and we had to cancel. So, so it's definitely been just finding innovative ways to connect with people, and really just. It's so important, you're trying to have that connection with people. You're trying to see what their concerns are, especially when it comes to local government. I think one of my main struggles was just the education piece. A lot of people didn't know what county commissioners are, or who they are, or what they do. And so that was just, I think, a whole nother piece that I had to add to it. And so really interesting conversations came in place. For me, I just started attending all the meetings, trying to see what issues were going on here locally that people were concerned about. I started doing a little show every Saturday called Coffee with Carolina, trying to highlight local organizations that were going, and also individuals that were going just above and beyond, especially right now during this pandemic. So it's been a learning experience. It's what it's been.
Yeah, I don't think that people recognize either that in Thurston County we only have 3 county commissioners. And so the county commissioner and the county oversees relatively speaking to the cities, like such a large amount of budget for issues like homelessness, housing, mental health, substance use treatment. And so like having those seats are so vitally important. And I think that a lot of people, especially folks in my kind of demographic, don't understand how important the county commission races really are here.
Yeah.
Yep.
I want to, oh, sorry, do you have anything to add?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and some of the conversations that we've had, a lot of people will always ask me, well, why do commissioners hear family juvenile cases at family juvenile court? And I'm like, it's not the same. Those are court commissioners. This is county commissioners. So yeah, education is a huge part of it.
Definitely. I want to talk, something that's come up a couple times through this is police accountability. And so I want to just talk a little bit about that more directly. This year, I'm thinking about all this stuff of like how hard it is to connect because of COVID-19, especially during this time where there's so many like hugely emotional things going on for folks. And I just imagine that it's just this really, just this really intense time for so many reasons. And I think this year in particular has shown this painfully bright light on the long-standing issue of police violence in our country. Just last night, Walter Wallace, a young black man with mental health challenges, was killed in Philadelphia, shot several times in front of his family while they were trying to de-escalate a mental health crisis. And, you know, we know that we have these issues happen locally as well throughout our state. And so I'm wondering how you all see yourselves responding to the really strong call for reimagining law enforcement in this country in tangible ways. And yeah, just to speak a little bit about that. Beth, do you want to start?
Well, at the federal level, I think the most important thing is to move forward on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which would end qualified immunity. It would, no chokeholds, no knock warrants. It's a pretty broad bill, requires implicit bias training, which I think is really important. Of course, Trump is going the other way on that in terms of our federal agencies and not allowing that to take place. But I think it's particularly important with law enforcement, and something that we've been talking a lot here since Andre and Bryson, two young unarmed black men, were shot here by a police officer in Olympia, and that started the whole movement around I-940, which we ultimately put to the ballot and passed. But nonetheless, issues continue in this state. Manny Ellis in the 10th Congressional District was basically murdered by police, and the investigation was fraught with challenges. When you have when police officers are investigating other police officers, there is a bias there. There is not just an implicit bias, it is explicit. And I think that is one of the most important things that I feel like we really need to do, is move away from investigations that are done by other police forces. So that I think we'll see some of that in legislation at the state level this year. There is a lot of work to kind of roll out and continue to move us forward on how we find and create a public justice system where everyone feels protected in their communities. And I think this conversation has been really really amazing. I think there's a lot of good that can come from how we approach policing and mental health. I mean, I think those are the two, the two things that kind of go hand in hand in terms of, this Walter, what was his name?
Walter Wallace.
Walter Wallace. So mental health, what is it, 30 to 40% of people who are, in a life-changing altercation with police are having a mental health crisis. And so having mental health people on hand while that is going on to help with de-escalation, I think would be really great. And yes, that does involve sort of thinking about how we fund, what we fund, who we fund when it comes to community safety. So I was in a situation myself where we were just having a family evening with another family down the block, and 8 police officers showed up at our door, all of them uniformed with weapons. And apparently, what had happened was there was one of the children was upstairs having suicidal ideation and was on social media talking about that, and they alerted the police and they came over. Now, that was incredibly intimidating as a person who was on, sitting there playing a family game, and all of a sudden these 8 police officers show up. I think that could have been handled differently. I feel like that is an opportunity for us to reimagine. It would have been really nice for a mental health provider to have been on hand with another police officer. And I think the outcome would have been much different and much better for that young woman. I am happy to say she's doing great, but...
Oh, good.
Yeah. So,
I think it's about accountability for law enforcement, and then decreasing the occurrences that law enforcement interact with people. And we've seen over time law enforcement budgets continue to increase while we've also divested from public housing, behavioral health supports, healthcare. We have an increase in poverty, people living on the streets, and the de facto number that everyone calls is 911, and then you have law enforcement that go out, and even with de-escalation, all these different reforms, we're still seeing these outcomes that are really, really bad and harmful. So in the state, things like civilian oversight, requiring that outside investigations incur, like the Attorney General. Like, we don't want to have what happened for Manny Ellis in Tacoma being investigated by some of the people that were actually there on the scene, not allowing military equipment to be utilized by local law enforcement, banning chokeholds. That civilian oversight piece, I think, is really important. As a person who works for local government currently, you know, it's very hard to track problem officers or to fire an officer that has committed harm on people. And then even if by a miracle they are fired, they can just go get a job somewhere else. So I'm not sure, I think it is within that legislation where it's talking about licensing police officers, like we license other professionals, like nurses have a license. So if
Social workers.
you have, if you commit a crime or harm, there's a way to track it, and you're not going to be able to get hired by someone else. Especially with when you have a weapon, I think it's incredibly important, and we don't have a system for that right now. I also think, you know, decarceration is super important to this conversation. It's kind of being left out, but it's really important that we focus on not continuing to incarcerate people. And that means, you know, at the local level, you know, we're looking at misdemeanor crimes at the local level. So say you have a progressive city that wants to do really progressive things, we need to do that at the state level. So low-level drug offenses. I mean, if you look at who's incarcerated, it's primarily people of color, people with mental illness, and people living in poverty. We know when we're having, and this will be a priority issue going into this legislative session by the Democratic Caucus, thank goodness, we don't want to continue to perpetuate those harms, especially when we're having conversations about racial justice and equity. So I'm really excited about that because I truly think that's the solution. And the cost of incarcerating someone in Washington State is about $40,000 per year. Think of all the good that we could do if we paid on the front end for wraparound services, education, comprehensive behavioral health, like all the different things we could actually do if we had that opportunity.
Yeah. Carolina?
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of history just here in Thurston County. Back in the 90s, we started partnering with CPS to address cases where there was child victims. And that ended up being a very fruitful relationship that really ended up working both for the police, CPS, and also the victims, where they were able to get their assistance in a much more efficient manner. I think we should really look into partnering with mental health specialists. Same thing, trying to just take that burden off police, really, and put it back onto mental health professionals to really assist people who are in need, people who are going through a crisis, and really just try to avoid, any sort of violence. But also, just speaking with the community, I think it's important that we, have an oversight committee board. I've spoken with several community members, also police officers, and I think we really need to bridge that gap, build that community trust again, and work on that. And I think that will require, if that's what it requires, having subpoena power too. I think it's important that we do that.
Yeah, I think that the building of community trust is such an important piece, like on a lot of conversations that I've had with people, again, that education piece, that if you're not embedded in politics day after day, there's so much that happens that you might not be aware of. And so a lot of folks who are really wanting to get involved in new ways don't understand what's already happening in terms of mental health support, particularly at the City of Olympia level. And then figuring out like what building that trust for those programs looks like, and how the community in general can be like part of creating what it looks like to reimagine the police. Because if it's just dictated what it looks like to reimagine the police by either law enforcement or government officials who may not be impacted day to day, then there's not going to be that trust for those systems to really like flourish, I feel like.
I have to give a plug since you're talking about this. For the City of Olympia, we are starting a process in 2021 based on the participatory leadership model that we utilized for the one community, the how do we respond to homelessness that you were a part of, that we'll be having a conversation about reimagining public safety. So that will be an opportunity to have people that are directly impacted in our community not being led by decision makers or people that fund the programs and policies or law enforcement. It'll have diverse voices at the table, so I hope people will engage in that, and we'll be publicizing that early in 2021.
Awesome. Yeah, that process, for anybody that didn't know, was there was like a community work group. Thank you. A community work group. I should know. I was on it. And had people from lots of different sort of representation from lots of different sectors in Olympia, including lived experience with homelessness, and then we facilitated 20 or something community meetings that were open to the public and targeted for different sectors as well. And all of that work over a year was put together in a plan that was meant to be really like an active, transformative plan that could adapt to changing times and all of that. So to hear that that's going to happen for reimagining law enforcement response is really awesome.
No, that's great.
Well, I want to kind of pivot just to, this idea that this is the final stretch. And what do you all think is the most important thing for voters to know coming into Election Day just 1 week from now? Or most important thing for us to hold on to, or anything like that?
So I think the most important thing to know is that we have seen a lot of people voting, more than usual, but the people that have already voted are the people that would have voted anyway. Like they're the regular voters. Those are the people who voted early. And so really in this last week, who votes is really going to decide what happens at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. And so, taking your foot off the pedal right now, when you think, oh, all these people have voted, well, those people are going to vote anyway. There are 4 voters. They're like people who always vote. And really, it's young people can really change the course of our nation by voting.
Yeah.
Right? That's who doesn't vote. And that's who still hasn't voted.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to know the power of a collective youth vote, the power of a collective progressive vote, of people who don't normally go to the polls. That's what needs to happen between now and we're a week away, the next 7 days. So I think that's, because we're seeing all these statistics like, oh, great, we're going to win. No.
Yeah.
We have a lot of work to do. There's still 50% of people who have not voted.
Yeah.
And if they vote, and especially if the young people vote, we could see very significant change in this country, and we need it. I can't imagine another 4 years under a Trump administration. I cannot imagine another 2 years with a Senate that's controlled by Republicans. They haven't even, the House has led on passing the HEROES Act, and which would provide, dollars into our communities, helping people, helping small businesses who are struggling to, day in and day out, helping people who can't pay their rents or their mortgages. They're, helping schools who are struggling to provide education and keep it interesting with students. They haven't acted on it. Instead, they did the Supreme Court nomination so that they can control the Supreme Court with a 6-3 vote for the next 50 years. That was their priority.
And then
not
called a recess.
Helping people. And what?
And then called a recess until after the election. Yeah.
It's really unconscionable. And really, we should step up and vote them out.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's really important that people know that their vote is super important.
Yeah.
What she said. Also, we have some really important races in Thurston County. We need to elect.
Oh my gosh, please.
County Commissioner Carolina Mejia. Absolutely. We have 3 county commissioners. 2 county commissioners will make a majority. Things like passing the home fund at the county level cannot happen with the current composition of our county commission. And frankly, we need her energy, we need her expertise, and we need her vision. And I'm so excited to have her as my new county commissioner
me too.
January of 2021. Also, the state legislature, we're going into a $4 billion deficit projected. There are going to be a lot of discussions about austerity measures and cutting programs and services that disproportionately help marginalized low-income people of color in Washington State. We're I can talk about the litany of programs that are on the chopping block. So we need someone there that will advocate for meaningful benefits and relief from our Congress, and I'm confident that future Congresswoman Dolio will be there for us on that. We also need progressive taxation. We need tax reform to look at the 660 tax breaks that we currently have. Before we have any discussions about cuts, we also have the most heavily public sector labor district in the state, and I am a champion for working people, and I will continue to do that. So please get involved and help elect local electeds. We have the Thurston County Coordinated Campaign. We've got lit dropping events in this next week, phone banking events. You can text message. Please put that energy to use and help elect people that will actually work to make a difference in our community. You have, I think, really the benefit of having some really great people on the ballot to represent you, so please do help and work for them.
Yes, to all of that. So much power. I love it. But I think it's just to honestly, both what Beth said and Jessica said, it's really spot on. There's honestly so much at stake for those of us who decide not to vote. I think everyone should really get out there to vote. It really matters. And I'm going to, challenge you to, challenge 3 other people. Contact them, ask them, have you voted yet? Because it really comes down to, with local elections, every little vote counts. We've seen it in the past before, how it's been decided by, little votes. So we need that. And we have a lot of contentious races going on right now. And we have so many great candidates that really need your support and need your help and need your vote. So please inform yourselves and definitely get out there to vote.
Thank you. I saw a thing today that if folks haven't mailed in their ballots yet, to consider dropping them off in person and to not mail it after today. So that's one additional tip to make sure that we do whatever we can to avoid a contested election. I think just personally that's a fear that I have going into next week of what that could mean in terms of further division of our country. And so just really hoping that people can do that. And I should know this, but do you all know, is it too late to register to vote at this point, or can people
still register?
Do you know what that deadline is?
I think it's election day.
Yeah.
It's election day? Okay.
The legislature passed a bill that made it so.
Awesome. Thank you.
There's the Thurston County Auditor's website, and you will see that information as well as all the drop boxes and also where you can do it in person, I think, at the county or the college
SPSCC. Yeah.
So what I am going to commit to in the next week, because I've been trying to look at ways to kind of, like you said, keep the foot on the gas. And so what I'm going to commit to, and I'm going to challenge everybody who's watching this to commit to something that's personally meaningful to you, to help get out the vote in the next week, is to do a push for registration and creating access for people who are experiencing homelessness to be able to vote in this election. And so I think we can make a push for that in our shelter programs. I also think we can, one of the outcomes of the COVID-19 homeless response has been that there's been an increase in resources going to outreach. And so I think we could reach out to some folks who are also unsheltered in our community to do that. So you fired me up to make a commitment. So good job on your messaging. And yeah, is there anything else that you want to say to the audience? Anything left to put out on the table before we close today?
I'll just thank you for your work over, a decade in our community, from the People's House to the Home Fund and that partnership with the Low Income Housing Institute, the shelter. Just, you've been a tremendous advocate for change, but also building relationships with people in the community, which I know is so important, and I've learned so much from that. And you advocate for folks that really need it, and you're effective, and I really appreciate the work that you do, so thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Force for good in our community. So lucky to have you. Thanks for doing this today.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely have an amazing team. Wouldn't be here without all the folks that are working in the shelters every day. And it's it's really a special place. I feel like Olympia is a very special place. Carolina, anything to add before we close?
No, just basically what Jessica said. Thank you so much for all you do. Thank you for this opportunity. And it's been great. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but it was great to hear from both Beth and Jessica and also you.